Gabriel, what happens in Vegas?
Man, all the things happen in Vegas. If you're not here in Vegas, you're missing out on the world's entertainment. You're missing out on the innovation that's happening out here. And more importantly, you're missing out on the community that's growing. And of course, I'm out here running for President of the United States. And simultaneously, I have a congressional run, which is a very interesting story to tell. And appreciate you having me so that way I can tell that story.
No worries. Thank you for being here. Were you born here in Las Vegas?
No, I've lived in 11 cities in 2 countries, but I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how would you compare the Las Vegas to any other cities you've lived in?
Yeah, if you can imagine having lived in all these places, all these different perspectives, the way I describe Las Vegas is actually like a small town with all the big amenities. And for me, that's actually my sweet spot. I moved out here for family, actually. This is my second time living here in Las Vegas. First time was after my grandfather had open heart surgery and my grandmother needed help with his recovery, so I came out because I'm a family caretaker. But then during the pandemic, my grandfather's legs and mouth stopped working and they had a flood, so if you can imagine, during COVID, they didn't want contractors in the house, so I came out here from California. I renovated their house, and now I live across the street from them. And I look after them and my 88-year-old great aunt.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So, what is the craziest thing you've seen in Las Vegas?
In Las Vegas, man, I would tell you that the city has a whole set of social media channels that'll give you all of the things that happen here. You cannot make this stuff up. But if it weren't on camera, it would be Hollywood stories. But my own personal experiences around here, Las Vegas, I would say that during the pandemic, that was probably the most unusual experience because it was like witnessing a zombie apocalypse or the end of the world film where there was just nobody on the strip, nobody around where you're so accustomed to seeing cars and hustle and bustle, and it was the complete opposite. So I imagine in your line of work you've seen a lot of movie sets with just nothing happening, and that's by design. Well, this was that moment in life where the world stopped, and even in a city as busy as Vegas, it did.
Yes, that must have been a crazy impact to all the businesses and.
You already know, yeah. The economy took a hit here.
Yeah, it took a big hit. So, let's go back to the very beginning. How did your career in politics started?
Sure. I don't know if I'd say I have a career just yet. And the reason why I want to have that clarification is because I only just started running for office. I don't have a history of a background of being in office previously. I actually have helped a few friends run for office at congressional levels. I even helped a presidential candidate win the state of Nevada. But this is actually my first run. It was running for president of the United States. And the reason why I got into the race is because, like many Americans, I didn't want Donald Trump versus Biden 2.0. Frankly, I think that we as a nation can do much better. And I also knew that Biden mentally wasn't prepared for this. You know, his age was in question, but more along the lines of his mental acuity. And knowing that I'm the guy that doesn't just sit and when things need to be done, I was like, all right, well, you know what? I'm capable and I pay attention enough and I'm here to be of service, not only for my own family, but to the larger community abroad. And I'll get into that, of course. So why not jump in this race? Because people are actively looking for somebody not named Biden or Trump. So that's when I started my run, was because Nevada was the first state in the union to have a deadline to qualify for President of the United States to get on the ballot.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, there is these couple of weeks there's been a lot going on. With the Trump event and now Biden stepping down. Yeah,
you're seeing history unfold in just a quick week and a half, 2 weeks. Unfortunately, there are so many things that are out of most people's purview when it comes to politics, but this week put everything into focus with an assassination attempt to Biden stepping down because of his debate performance and the rest of the world catching up to what I knew to be true, which is why I jumped in the race, that he wasn't fit to lead this country. So the rest of the world saw it, and the pressure built because not only did it impact his race, but it was also starting to affect the down ballot races, meaning those that are running for Congress, running for Senate, anybody that is below those levels of uh, uh, candidacies and races, those were all being affected because when it comes down to politics, everything is about the money. And Biden's impact in being on the Democratic ticket was starting to affect the money of the other politicians, which is why they pushed him out.
I see. There has been a lot of people saying that it was a setup. It was everything. The Trump's attempt to.
Like
What's your take on that? Do you think it was?
As in, like it was a farce, like it wasn't real?
Yes.
Oh no, there's no way. Like that, there's no way that you could put together something with that close of a call and have it be staged. That's not something that I physically could think of anybody putting themselves, like Trump would never put himself in that type of situation and turn with microseconds to nearly have the bullet graze his ear. No, that would not be something I would entertain as real.
And but what do you think? This is definitely helping Trump's campaign. Well, what's your opinion on that?
I mean, my sense of it is that Trump has a ceiling. Just because somebody tried to kill him, yes, people are going to feel for him and recognize that there are people out there that want to harm him and harm other politicians too, right? So you're going to get some empathy and some sympathy behind that. But when it comes down to it, his policies haven't changed. His attitude may have changed, at least for presentation purposes. We just had the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, so he came out and he seemed to be very stoic and very patient, which is contrary to the personality and the reputation he's built up along this entire public-facing, let's call him presidential persona. It doesn't match. So when it comes down to it, polls have showed he didn't get the bump that most people would expect. Like Reagan, after his assassination attempt, he had a big bump, about 22%. You're not going to see that with Trump because he's already established himself as this divisive person.
Yeah.
So as much as I want to wish his family well, and I'm glad that he's okay, I don't think that without a policy change, without demonstrating to the public that he is actually a whole other person and not just because he's politically prudent, I don't know that it's going to be of value for him other than having people who already support him be solidified that somebody is out there actively trying to stop him. But it's actually just of his own making. Mm-hmm.
So what about what's your take on Biden stepping down?
Yeah, so the reason why I ran in the primary, and we did have a pseudo primary, I have to clarify this because most people that don't get into the weeds like I do with politics, typically a primary, the candidates get on ballots across the country, right? So to bring everybody up to speed, myself and my fellow presidential candidates, we were kept off the ballot in Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, me specifically in Massachusetts, and there are many other states where there were actions taken by the Democratic Party itself to prevent other candidates from being on the ballot, therefore pushing Biden to the forefront and basically rigging the race for him. The reason why they did that is because they didn't want to challenge any challengers, right? But that rubber stamp of giving him the race, the primary, without a challenge. He never showed up on the debate stage. I was on several debate stages and nationally televised several times. I called him out on the debate stage for not showing up because I knew he wasn't fit. So, of course, once he finally did get on the debate stage and the rest of the world caught on to this, that's when the pressure rose. But now what's happening with the Democratic Party since, the primary has come and gone, and so for the primary, it's no longer in the hands of the voters, those that would have the voice in determining who their champion is. It actually now is in the hands of the delegates, the people that have been elected to represent the primary voters. They're going to be heading to the Democratic National Convention, or at least traditionally that's what's supposed to happen. What is happening at this moment is the Democratic Party is trying to obfuscate that process and have an early roll call where the delegates will get a virtual nomination process. They're trying to get this pushed through by August 7th. The Democratic National Convention is actually in August 19th through the 22nd. And the reason why they're trying to push this through, just like they tried to push through Biden, they're trying to push through Kamala Harris. And we, my fellow presidential candidates, we think that we would rather have an open convention because I think the American public needs to hear from other people not named Kamala Harris, because maybe we have a better vision. Maybe we're actually going to be the best champion for the Democratic Party against Donald Trump. We've already seen what actions the Democratic Party would take to circumvent any challengers. Well, the same thing is playing out now, right? When it comes down to it, just so everybody has insight, the delegates, ordinarily, they're supposed to vote at the National Convention for whoever won the primary. Okay, so in this case, it would have been Biden. But because he stepped down, those delegates are free to vote for whoever they want. Now, what advantages that Kamala Harris has is she gets access to all those people to call them and persuade them to vote for her. My fellow presidential candidates, we don't. So we actually don't even have a chance to engage with them without trying to find some way to get in touch with them individually, which is another facet of this experience that most people don't have an understanding around. But these are the ways that the establishment retains its power, is they take these little tricks, like preventing us from getting on ballots or preventing us from having access to the delegates, and then trying to force through Kamala Harris without a proper vetting process. And so what you're seeing in the public is you've got certain members of the Democratic Party, like Barack Obama, President Obama, saying you need to have an open primary. But then you have a whole swath of other people that have already fallen in line and are endorsing Kamala without going through a vetting process. And I think that's harmful for the country because you want to put up the best candidates, but that's not how power works. The power tries to hold on to its power, and they're trying to paint the picture that Kamala Harris is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and that may be true, but shouldn't she prove that? And shouldn't the American voter be privy to seeing all that, or at least the Democratic voters at this present time? I would say yes, and my fellow presidential candidates that actively want to express their message of how we believe we can change the country for the better for the vast majority, we believe we deserve to be heard as well.
Yeah, it seems very unfair. So is this the biggest challenge you're facing right now?
Yeah, at this present moment, if we do not get in touch with the delegates, and by we I mean my fellow presidential candidates, because there are several of us that I've been in communication with, if we don't get access to them come August 7th, if the Democratic Party succeeds in being able to have this roll call, then that's it. That race is done, and she becomes the nominee. And so between now and then, it's my job, it's my fellow presidential candidate's job to try to bring this to the media, to try to bring it to the public's consciousness, to show, look, these are the actions that led to Biden becoming the nominee when he was clearly not ready. And guess who was his right-hand man? Well, you've got Kamala Harris. And so she knew his mental stature, and yet we're going to push her to the forefront and say that she's operating in good faith? No, that doesn't make sense to me. If she's been covering up for him, she's just as complicit in trying to run this whole ruse around the American voter. And that's not okay. And I'd like to make sure that I have the opportunity to say that to the rest of the delegates and to the rest of America, so that way people are transparent about what's happening. Power has corrupted our entire political process, which is why I jumped into this race. I'm just an average American. I don't have it, and I come from a background, as I explained, which gives me the intent and the passion to try to change the country for the better, because I'm not part of the establishment. I'm not here for power. I'm here for advocating for change for the majority of us.
So what will need to happen in order for this to change?
Yeah. Well, what we're trying to accomplish right now is we need a certain amount of delegates in order for them to say, you know what, we're not lining up behind Kamala Harris. We need to demand an open convention. We need public pressure, and we also need access to the media to get this message out there. Because at present, what's being pushed out into the public and through legacy media is that there are no other challenges to Kamala Harris. Well, that's not true. It's simply not true, right? Marianne Williamson, she's been able to successfully get onto media across the country and make that argument that she's still interested. Now, myself and another fellow presidential candidate, Frankie Lozada, based out in New York, we are not millionaires, so we don't have access to the same network. We don't have access to the same resources, but we're still advocating for fighting for the majority of us versus just acquiescing to what is being forced down our throats, which was Biden originally, and now it's Kamala Harris.
I heard that Trump campaign cost 75 million last time, or something.
So no, it's estimated that there's going to be $500 billion invested in this election cycle. And the way that you can find these things out is through the FEC filing, the Federal Election Commission. You get to see how much people have already received, and by people I mean candidates have already received. So for example, Kamala Harris, just in the past 2 days, since she was announced as a presumptive nominee, 150 million was donated to her. How does somebody like myself, who comes from modest means, compete with that? Well, the only way that I can compete with that is if I'm able to reach the public through the means that are afforded to me through my limited resources. So what I found is that my message resonates with folks because guess what? We're the majority, right? But the majority is not doing well financially. And the reason why I'm in this race is because I want to renovate America. And I want to focus on families and community. And of course, now we have to make America affordable. And that's something that requires people that understand the landscape, but also operate in good faith with that intention. And that's the policy platform that I've laid out is how do we get there? How do we make it so that America is affordable again?
What are the biggest issues for you? I think I heard you say healthcare, corruption. Can you?
Sure. Yeah, usually when I'm asked about what are my policies and what is most important, I list off 3 policies. Okay, first and foremost, the reason why our country is where it's at, where there's a lot of division and there's a lot of despair, more than there needs to be, right, is because money in politics. Okay, the Supreme Court, they made this decision called Citizens United, where basically they said it's legal for unlimited amounts of money to be contributed to a campaign through various channels in the form of speech. Okay, and so what ends up happening is any donations to a campaign, there are legal limits within receiving funds from individuals, but there are ways to go around this system and donate as much as you want to steer the politician in the direction that they want, calling it speech. But really, that's just legalizing bribery. And what we've done is we've now made it so those that have power and wealth can now buy those who are creating legislation and steering the country. And for me, that's the most important aspect of what we need to change. And so my policies of ending the corruption by getting money out of politics means things like publicly funded elections like they do in Canada, getting it so that we ban the stock trades that happen with members in Congress because they get insider knowledge and they enter into office, modest income, and they leave as millionaires. How does that happen? Coincidence? I think not. But there are many other things.
But hasn't this always been like this way?
No.
In this country?
No, it hasn't. It was after this Supreme Court decision that this started happening. And because of that, the only way to rein that in is you need somebody to be elected at the top of the ticket who's not here to operate for monetary gain, right? Myself and my background, I was in a near-fatal car accident in 2011. I was in a rollover and convertible, and I was life-flighted to the hospital. I fractured my skull, suffered some brain damage, broke my hand, injured my back, right? But what I walked away from with this experience and surviving this experience was that we're not promised tomorrow, and that I wasn't fulfilled by what I had been pursuing. And I wanted people to gain that wisdom as well without having to go through something traumatic like this to be able to find fulfillment. And so I've committed my time and efforts ever since that moment towards things that I think would help better my community and create conditions for people to find fulfillment. And so my intent in being in this race is to help create conditions across America so people can find fulfillment and do more than just surviving from paycheck to paycheck. We can't get there unless you have somebody that is willing to operate with that integrity. And I don't see that when you have politicians that are part of this establishment, like Kamala Harris, who are going to operate as the donors tell them to. And you're seeing that.
Healthcare, that has always been a big one.
It is. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's number 2 on my list of 3. So number 2 being healthcare. What I've found in my experience, that near fatal car accident as well, is it was a hit and run. So I actually had to sue my own insurance company just to cover my healthcare costs. Right now, thankfully, I had the foresight. I was very conservative and maximized my my auto insurance coverage, so that covered my healthcare costs. But if you can put yourself in the shoes of the average American, healthcare costs are skyrocketing, premiums are very expensive, and often you have to have deductibles with all these complex requirements in order to get partial coverage. So we, as a nation, have the most expensive healthcare system by double, and we are having a lower life expectancy. Well, there are other nations that have figured out much more effective and efficient and cost-efficient methods, and I think that it's important that we as a nation consider having a single-payer healthcare system, and not only because I think it's more efficient from a business perspective by getting rid of the insurance companies, but it's also important to me that we put politicians like myself on the exact same plan. And the reason being is because if it is not effective, if it is not efficient, then my interest as a politician on the same plan is to advocate for change and to improve it, right? Because often what happens is when there's a disconnect, let's say that I have a super premium program and all the other average Americans have a very different experience, a much lower quality experience, well then what is my incentive to change that? Because if I'm never experiencing that, then what do I care, right? But if you put those politicians in the exact same life raft, if you will, then they're inclined to operate with the integrity of improving that experience for all of us, because they're in the same boat.
I see. I had a friend who sadly passed away. He had brain cancer, and because of it, his wife had to declare bankruptcy.
Yeah, we're the only industrialized nation that has that problem. Declaring 60% of our bankruptcies are due to medical debt.
60%.
60%.
That's insane.
It is insane. And why is it that if we're the greatest country, the wealthiest country in the world, why are we the only ones that have this problem?
But please correct me if I'm wrong. America spends a lot of money in the military. Do you think that's why that money is not, they put it in the military versus the healthcare system?
Let me give you more context to that question, if I may. Okay, so right now our country is almost $35 trillion in debt. Okay, so even if it was a question of if we had the resources to commit it towards healthcare, right now we're at such a state in our country that we can't just redirect funds. We actually actively have to find ways to cut costs. Okay, so yes, the military-industrial complex gets a large swath of our money as a nation. Okay, that's a problem. Yes, but at the same time, what we need to focus on for healthcare, if we were to go into a single payer and we were able to cut that program per capita basis in half, well, we're saving money and we're getting a more efficient experience because everybody would be covered under a single payer healthcare program. And then, of course, there are many, many other ways that we need to save money in this country because we're so far in debt and our deficit is only increasing. How do we solve these things?
So I'm understanding that that number keeps rising.
Yeah, the debt does, yes, and the deficit has gone down slightly under Biden. Trump is, unfortunately, he added so much more, $7 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, while he was in office, right? And remember, they're supposed to be the fiscally responsible party. Well, you found that not to be the case, right? And the Democratic Party loves to infuse more money into the government, but more specifically, especially in recent developments, we've been contributing a lot of money towards foreign wars. I know that's pissing off a lot of Americans because, especially as despair has increased here, why is it we always find money for other nations for war?
Yes, that is a great question. So how does a country get out of such a big debt?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is where my economic policies are part of the answer, right? What I find that is happening, and this is the way I've diagnosed our country, and this is the third policy of the three that I mentioned. It's called universal basic income, okay? And before I spell that out, let me declare what I think the problem is, so that way we can address that with this third solution. Okay, so what we have is a free market capitalistic society, okay? But there are elements to this sort of formation that need to be consistent. And so in order for us to have an efficient free market, there needs to be competition. What we've seen, at least as long as I've been alive, is you've seen a lot of consolidation happen in all these different markets. And with this consolidation, you've killed off competition, and so you've created monopolies. Or you have crony capitalism that exists as well, basically, which means that these monopolies have accumulated so much wealth and power, and then they buy politicians to skew the playing field even further in their direction, which kills off competition, which eventually leads to the demise of capitalism, because if without an efficient free market, you actually don't have a free market system. And so for us, in order to address what the problems are, is we're seeing now the faults of this type of monopolization, because the playing field has been so skewed in favor of these companies that consumers are running out of money. Okay, we have record high credit card debt. We have buy now, pay later on the rise, because people don't have the means to pay for things other than just for surviving from paycheck to paycheck. So if they cannot continue to pay for goods, and Las Vegas is the canary in the coal mine, this is why it's so important that we pay attention to what happens here, is when people run out of money to go on vacation, money to spend out at restaurants, money to go do things that are outside of just keeping a roof over the head, food on the table, clothes on their back, right? When that starts to happen, businesses start to shut down. And what we saw as an example is what happened during the pandemic, right? We lost a whole swath of businesses because there were no consumers that could pay for the products, right? The shutdown killed off the mom and pop shops, which is actually something that I tried to prevent. I haven't even discussed what my business pursuits have been since this car accident, but what I'm trying to get at is, as consumers run out of money, so too the businesses will start to fail, because they can no longer afford to keep their doors open because there's no more consumers. And so to rectify this as quickly as possible, universal basic income, and I like to use the example of playing the game of Monopoly. Have you ever played Monopoly?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, when you pass go, you collect $200, right? And that money is intended to keep you active in the game. Okay. The same thing can be applied to universal basic income, which is basically the government collects taxes, and instead of those taxes going through bureaucratic programs, which are inefficient or they're very expensive to deploy, my recommendation is that we give that money to consumers, all of Americans. Okay. And this would come in the form of $1,000 a month is the example that Andrew Yang mentioned, who was a presidential candidate during the 2020 election cycle. And this $1,000, as just a hypothetical, goes into your pocket every month. What would you do with that money? Probably pay for childcare, probably pay for maybe it's education, maybe you're going to go to restaurants, vacation, whatever that looks like. What that does is it actually stimulates the economy, because there's somebody on the other end that needs to be able to service that new productivity. If you're a consumer and you've got money again, then you're able to purchase things, goods and services. But at the same time, what we also need to focus on is dismantling these monopolies, because you need to have a competitive landscape. And the accumulation of wealth and these concentration of all these different markets has led to this slowing of what is the term is velocity of money. Okay? How quickly does money change hands? And because the wealthy spend money at a much slower rate, that money has slowed down completely, which hurts the economy. We need to speed that up by empowering consumers again. So breaking up the monopolies, but also giving people money rather than having the government, who is again inefficient and expensive. We have empowered people to solve problems for themselves while also creating productivity in the economy. I mean, ultimately, the way that this is beneficial, because remember, everything that I'm talking about is we have two problems, right? We need to bring down the debt and deficit. Okay. We also need to increase GDP, gross domestic product, for those that don't know that acronym. We need to increase the productivity. Well, if consumers don't have the ability to purchase any goods, then that gets hurt. So this is actually like both sides. If you're able to mitigate risk with healthcare, right, and cut costs, that was the policy number 2, right? And then the third policy is this approach of, rather than the government deploying services and programs, which is expensive, now we've offered a cheaper avenue and we've empowered people to solve problems for themselves rather than the government doing so. We're accomplishing a few different solutions with just these two policies. But me, and getting into my background about this car accident, what I've done since that moment was I took the initiative to build my own company after this car accident, because I knew that I wasn't fulfilled by what I wanted to pursue. So I've been an entrepreneur since this car accident, and so I know what that experience is like to have to build something, a startup, from scratch. Most entrepreneurs and startups fail because of lack of funding, right? Well, with these two policies, what are the risks involved for any entrepreneur or any dreamer to want to pursue an idea in their mind? Well, here in America, they need to mitigate the risk of their health care, right? Because that's part of the factor for anybody that's currently working. If I leave my employer, where does my health care come from, right? If we solve that problem, we've mitigated that risk, then the next is, how do I cover my basic needs to then go pursue these endeavors that I have in my mind? And so by infusing these two policies, my goal is to create the conditions for people to find this fulfillment, but also turn the United States into the world's largest startup incubator, which allows us to become the most competitive country in the world, because we have all these innovations that will be taking place because people finally will be unchained from their risks to be able to go pursue and innovate. And that pushes society forward. And that's what I'm hoping to accomplish.
Would you like to talk about your business?
So since the car accident, what I discovered was that fulfillment was important to me, and I wanted other people to find fulfillment. And so I was assessing what the landscape looked like. What is it that people find fulfilling? Usually pursuing a business venture, right? Maybe somebody wants to open their hair salon. Maybe somebody wants to start a tech company. Maybe somebody wants to start a restaurant, right? All these things that people want to accomplish in their lives because maybe that's what fulfills them. Well, how can they accomplish that if we've got players that are swallowing up whole markets? And so at that time, what I assessed was Amazon was going to be the biggest bully in the room. And so since this car accident in 2011, I've been trying to create companies to take on Amazon, because my concern is that we were going to become the United States of America, brought to you by Amazon. And you're starting to see that, right? From production studios, that's in your industry, right? Pharmacy, to grocery stores, to monopolization of online market purchases. They own half of the internet with their Amazon Web Services offering. They're in defense contracting. They've got their hands in so many different facets of our society that I see that as a threat to the actual driven method of what our country is supposed to be, which is a free market system whereby people are free to pursue happiness. And if you don't get control of these monopolies, then how can people actually pursue happiness if they become just a part of those that have already won, right? And that's what I think is important. I wasn't successful with my creation of my first startup, even though I started like Amazon. I started with books, and the intent of the platform that I built was to be like Priceline or Kayak for consumer goods, because I knew that people wanted to find what they're looking for wherever it's online or in the physical world, but the discovery process of what they're looking for is the hardest part of life, and including in consumerism, right? So Amazon had this competitive advantage where if you're shopping for something, they have almost everything, right? And so people found that if I only have to go to one place, shopping online, that's easy. Cool, great. Which is why people don't want to go from site to site to site. And so Amazon's competitive advantage was that pain point of the discovery process. So my platform was predicated on giving you, the end user, the consumer, the ability to see not only Amazon's offerings, but your local retailers too. And so I use the analogy of if you're shopping for gas, you've got a gas station on the right and you've got a gas station on the left. What you're doing in that moment is you're calculating, maybe your decision is based on price and the gas station on the left is cheaper, but you're also factoring in, well, there's a longer wait there, all right, I have to make a left turn, right? So maybe your answer changes to the gas station on the right because at that moment, time is important to you, right? In the same way, shopping online with my platform, giving you all the results not only from the online retailers, but the physical retailers nearby, maybe it's important that you get it from a local retailer because you can get it faster, or maybe because you want to support your local economy, right? And that's something that I knew was going to be a problem if Amazon was to succeed. And we saw the ramifications of my of this not existing during the pandemic, because the winners of the pandemic were all the companies that had the logistics to deliver and had the online presence to be able to have people that did have money order from them, right? So those local retailers, they took a hit, or those local retailers became partnered with these companies that were going to exploit them financially, like Uber Eats, DoorDash, and the like, right? And so at that time, I started building during the pandemic a nonprofit version of this offering because I knew that I wanted to be able to not only provide for the local retailers, but I figured that I could use the actual income from those that did have money to pay to deliver for the food banks and those that nonprofits that had resources for those that didn't have money, right? So I was trying to figure out a solution to do that. Of course, I didn't get to continue to pursue that endeavor because that's when my grandfather's mouth and leg stopped working. And so then I moved out here to Las Vegas, even though I had 50 volunteers at that time and we were building this thing. So unfortunately, life took me out of pursuing that, but my driven nature is to try to still solve these problems. And now I'm just taking a political approach, a public-facing approach to try to create the exact same conditions where I'm trying to give people the ability to find fulfillment. And I still think that's possible. All I'm trying to do is give people an informed decision, right? And through that informed decision, it ultimately, that's where people are going to discover the thing that matters to them most. And the pursuit of my endeavor was not just purely for the commerce side of things. The larger goal was to align people with similar interests. Because if you imagine, your consumer habits are actually insights into your interests. You've got a lot of equipment here, right? I bet you've searched for them online or maybe at a physical store before, right? And if I'm able to align you with other people that have similar interests by saying, hey, did you know that there's an event that pertains to this, to cinematography in your area? And all of a sudden you've just started forming a network with other people. You guys are probably going to start pursuing these interests together, right? And that's where that fulfillment in life comes together. So it wasn't just solving the commerce side of things. It was actually a way for me to gain insight into what you actually like and are interested in, and then get that discovery process. Remember, that's the hardest part of life, and finding fulfillment is, how do I discover what is fulfilling? Okay, maybe I know what that is, but how do I find other people that also find this stuff fulfilling and align with them? We met at something mutually, that we're mutually interested in. But like conventions, that's a a harder organic thing to happen. But if we were able to manufacture that through your commerce experience and say, oh, hey, by the way, did you know that there's an event that pertains to your interest in your area? You might go pursue that. And in that pursuit, you may meet other people and start to innovate and start to pursue things that you both or all of you find fulfilling. And that's all I've been trying to do, is create those conditions for people to find that fulfillment. And that's because of that car accident. I want people to experience life to its fullest. And so these are the barriers that I found to that discovery. And so through commerce and through transactions, I wanted to alleviate that barrier as best I could, while also solving this economic problem.
Illegal immigration, is that a big one for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I talk about immigration because I know that it's often brought up, especially during election cycles. But the way that I frame things, I give context. So my dad's from El Salvador. My brother just married a Canadian. At some point, I was engaged to a Canadian myself. So I'm very much a proponent of legal immigration. But what we have in our country is often this subject, especially when it comes to election cycles, becomes a wedge issue, right? It's one of these things that I like to present, that why is it that I'm 42 years old, and in 2 weeks I'll be 42 years old. In my lifetime, we haven't solved this issue. We haven't addressed the issues that exist, and so let me spell them out. Right? We obviously hear about the border and it not being secure. That's often the talking point. And that may be true. Like a physical barrier, I believe, is necessary, but I also believe that there's technology that should be utilized in order to secure our border, to establish the proper means to enforce a legal pathway. But at the same time, our legal pathways take so long that it's no wonder that people are like, no, I'm not going to wait in line. If it's going to take me 20 plus years, I'm just going to go around the system. And what ends up happening, especially during election years, and even with Donald Trump, he likes to lean in and say immigrants are bad and they're criminals and all of his rhetoric, right? But what I like to try to infuse into the conversation is I need people to understand immigrants come to this country because either they're fleeing something or they're pursuing some opportunity, right? And in this case, where does the power center lie between the dynamic of an immigrant and an employer, right? Because immigrants cannot feed themselves without employment, without getting paid. So the power is actually in the hands of the employer. So I don't like to just talk about this subject from the vantage of immigrants who are coming outside of our legal system as a problem, because you also have employers that are hiring the undocumented, and in doing so, they also are contributing to this problem. So my policies and the way I talk about this subject is, not only do you secure the border with physical barrier and technology, but you also need to make sure that you take action against those employers. And so the subject that often gets brought up is E-Verify, which is just to confirm that employers are hiring citizens, right? Because the reason why most Americans have this reaction to undocumented workers is because it hurts the labor force. And I can certainly understand that and appreciate that. And so this is where my approach is not just focus on the undocumented, it's also the employers that are hiring them outside of the legal process, and all those that are here as either with a work visa or citizens. They're hurting our whole immigration process. So the solution isn't just enforcement of the law. We also need to advocate for resources to deploy to those that have been waiting in line, right, because that takes so long. And then there are other methods that need to be deployed in order to try to get to the crux of the issue of why people are immigrating here in the first place. And part of this is the history of America. We've disrupted a lot of Latin America for our own financial means, right? And we're seeing the results of that, right? So one of the policies that I believe that would be very beneficial towards solving the immigration problem and why people are migrating here to begin with is if we work and partner with nations and have our businesses partner with nations in Latin America, using something similar to like was deployed in after World War II, a Marshall Plan, where we partner with these countries and help them get back on their feet economically, you'll see that migration amount of people coming to the United States change because they're able to support themselves in their home nation. But let's say that there are scenarios where we accomplish that, but there are people that are coming here because they're seeking asylum. Well, the other end of that spectrum is, rather than having them have to come to our border to declare and seek asylum, we can obviously make it possible for them to go to our embassies in their nation of origin and request that there. And that saves the people that are fleeing something or seeking asylum that dangerous track that comes with our current process. And so I look at this whole immigration topic and I try to understand logistics around everything, but also acknowledge that we had a heavy hand in creating this disruption that has created this migration across these nations. And so one of the countries that I pay close attention to is El Salvador, right? They managed to turn their country around. There were a lot of dramatic efforts to make that possible, but you're starting to see tourism pick up there, and you're starting to see the economic prosperity that's happening with it. And so I think that's one of those examples of a model that we can help facilitate by partnering with countries that we have unfortunately had a history of disrupting, and change our approach to then create conditions for those countries to be stable, so that way this migration isn't so vast.
I see. If I may, I will ask your help to understand this a little better.
Mm-hmm.
I can share my experience.
Please.
I have met people
Mm-hmm.
that complain about illegal immigrants taking their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I've also I'd build a house and
Mm-hmm.
I hire a contractor.
Yeah.
And I had this conversation with him, and number one, he's saying that the average American doesn't want these jobs.
Sure.
And all his crew were essentially illegal immigrants.
Mm.
And he was saying that, I mean, not just his company, a large percentage of companies, contractors,
Mm-hmm.
they're forced to hire illegal immigrants because they can't find enough people to do those jobs, and also because they're also cheaper, and they're makes their business grow.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah. So what you're explaining, right, is you've got a dilution of the market, right? Because it's like saying, I'll use the example of NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was an agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, right? The inclusion of Mexico, who had a lower standard of living, and who also did not have the employment protection the way the United States and Canada did. What that did was an agreement with them saying that we would allow for jobs to be intermixed in between all of our countries, is it diluted the salaries of the employees, right? Because if I'm an employer and I can get cheaper labor, right, there's a reason why you see companies that'll get call centers from India or the Philippines, right? Because they can pay them significantly less to deploy that. I'm against that wholeheartedly, because what you're doing as a company is you're obfuscating your responsibility to employing those consumers that live in your home nation, right? So the reason why I'm against that is it not only creates a competitive advantage for those that already have the capital, right? Because if I'm a company that wants to be able to compete with you, Amazon, right? How do I compete with you when you already have accumulated so much wealth and use all the tricks of what was available to you by undercutting and paying for actual employees, in America? Well, yeah, of course, me as a new employer trying to compete with you, I can't afford that because my costs are going to be much higher than yours, right? And so when it comes down to hiring a crew, as long as we allow that to happen, then the market never gets to settle from a labor perspective. Because if I'm a crew that has unionized employees and this other contractor has been able to undercut the cost of the unionized employees, that skews the market. So that's why you have to address those employers that are hiring undocumented, because assuming that they can't do that, then they actually have to hire Americans, and now the competitive landscape is more a fair market value. And that actually is an improvement for the entire labor market, because no longer are you able to operate with that that type of process where you are able to undercut somebody because you're using undocumented labor. There are opportunities, though, to have programs to bring in legal labor for those jobs that maybe Americans don't want to pay, but they have to come in through work visas. And that's something that we can advocate for, but as long as we allow it to happen under the table, that's only going to hurt the entire labor market, and that's only going to sow division in our country. And that's why it's important that I frame these arguments not just from the vantage of the immigrant, but also where does the power center actually lie? It's in the employer's hands.
Someone also told me that they like it this way because then these employees don't have rights.
No benefits. They can hold them.
Benefits,
yep.
Yeah. They like it this way.
The employers get to have hold all the cards, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah. You basically become a servant to me. That's not okay.
It's not okay.
No. And you're exploiting the immigrants, but you're also not holding the responsibility of you being a job creator for your community and your fellow, countrymen.
Yeah. Do you believe in the American dream?
Yeah, of course, I do. I do think that it's unaffordable at the moment, and I think a lot of people feel that way as well. And that's more prevalent than ever in the costs of our housing costs, right? Here in Nevada, we've got a very big problem, right? Again, using the monopoly game as an example, where we're at in the nation, but here in Nevada, is we've got a late stage version of the game Monopoly where somebody owns a lot of the board, right? A lot of the properties, right? The same thing happens, and I have to get an up-to-date number, but in 2017 there was a Las Vegas Review Journal said that there were 8 entities that own 9,000 units, single-family homes, right? And through my own interaction with people, I met this gentleman that owned 900 properties individually by himself, right? And it's like, wait a minute, how can I still pursue the American dream when you've got all the properties? And then you infuse the idea of, let's use BlackRock, as they're often a target, and they have earned that. They come in and buy new production homes, right? If they're able to buy those out from average Americans like you and I, well, how am I supposed to compete and actually buy a house when you've got all the capital? Again, coming back to that idea of monopolization of a lot of different sectors. If you've got all the capital, that power dynamic, you can undercut and skew the market however you want, because if you can buy out all the new properties, I have to go through the process of trying to get a mortgage and qualify. And of course, the rates currently in the country are high, which means it's even more expensive right now for me to qualify, and I'm not seeing my dollar go as far. Well, this is turning our country into the antithesis of the American dream. And we're turning into a renter's class instead of the American dream, which is where I'm supposed to be able to buy a home and have a family and pursue happiness in whatever form that looks like. So it's gotten out of control as far as expenses come into play, but the housing market is the prime example. And if I can't buy a home and I have to live with roommates because that's the only way I can survive, well, no, we don't have the American dream anymore. And that's where my administration and my policies are built to design to try to take that back. And so one of the policies that I advocate for, and I think is pertinent not only to Nevada but to the rest of the country, is putting a cap on how many properties an individual and an entity can own at one time, especially in the single-family home side of that equation. Because if you can have as many properties as you want and you can get that income and then turn that into more properties, and you're able to undercut anybody else that wants to buy a home to have the American dream, well, how do we rectify that? And that's where I say, nope, we're going to put a cap. I know here in the state of Nevada, there have been state legislators that have tried to put a 25 property cap in terms of what can be owned at one time. And I'm a big proponent of putting a cap myself, because I think that's the only way, because we cannot build our way out of this problem. Because here, especially in the state of Nevada, we've got a water issue to keep an eye on, right? We have water rights that have only been negotiated till 2026 between the states that all share the Colorado River. So if we have this finite resource as the limiting factor, if we build and build and build more properties, but we can't support that populous growth because we don't have the water to support that, then you're not paying attention to the entire situation.
Yeah, that's a good one. Water and the construction rate. There is a satellite video, time lapse. Las Vegas from the year 2000.
The Hoover Dam.
Have you seen it?
Yeah.
It's like an explosion. Like
it is.
It just grew so big, and it keeps going. And I think I saw some place that if they continue building at this speed, they're going to run out of land in like 8 years or something like this. Is this correct?
Well, yeah, because most of the land is actually federal land, so unless that becomes made available, you're going to run out of land. But more importantly, until you solve the water problem, you can't just build in perpetuity. And that's my argument, at least for Nevada specifically. But across this country, what are we supposed to do? Just continue to build and build, and then if we don't adjust this strategy of putting caps on how many properties can be owned, then those that already have capital, who then bring on renters, who now have more income, and then buy more property. Like if you don't get rid of that process, then how can people ever own property or compete against those that have already so much capital that they can come and undercut you anytime that they want? Right? That's the crux of the issue.
I see, yeah.
But Nevada specific is also the water factor on top of that.
But Las Vegas has always been very good about recycling and the usage.
Yep.
And as I understand, it's California that is sucking it all, correct?
Well, not just California, right? So there are other states that share the Colorado River. So, but California has a lot of farming, and that takes a lot of water for the different crops that they have as a part of their economy. But I mean, like when you share the same water rights with Arizona and Utah, and they don't take the same active measures to restrict the way that we have, well, is that fair to us? If we're doing all the heavy lifting in terms of conserving water, and they're not, right? And that's part of the reason why this water rights contract is going to have to be renegotiated. This was supposed to be renegotiated last summer, if not the summer before, I'm trying to remember, and the federal government had to step in, right? So this is where our specific issue in Nevada is, yes, we're great at saving, right? And we've figured that part out, but we're also, because we share the same water source, we have to make sure that these other states are taking measures to also conserve. Otherwise, where does this go?
But do you think those levels, water levels, will ever go back up? I remember visiting the Hoover Dam maybe 2007, and the water was like to the very top.
Yeah.
And now is, was it last year, right? That it was a red alert?
It was. So we were a near dead pool, right? And just to fill in the audience, basically the generation that we get for electricity through the Hoover Dam was in question, right? And so I kept a close eye on this, not only for my own interest to make sure that I'm staying informed, but remember, I've got elderly grandparents, and so when we started installing solar onto the home, I also wanted to make sure that we had battery storage, so that if this water shortage was to continue and we were going to have brownouts, right, we weren't able to produce enough energy, that my grandparents were still able to have AC because elderly don't do well in general in the heat. And so I wanted to make sure that we combat that. So when it comes down to here in Nevada, we were on the cusp of a near dead pool, right? We had a flood of water that happened October of last year, and that helped alleviate the drought that was in California, and it raised our water levels a little bit, but it's certainly not the definitive height that you had mentioned before, because that would be more reassuring, but that doesn't solve the problem of if we have this migration because of costs and we're building, that means that there are more mouths to provide water for, right? So solutions that are being proposed, desalinization plants, transporting water from the east through a pipeline to the west, like these are all part of the consideration, but they haven't been implemented or solved just yet.
That sounds like a good idea, because some of that water from the east just goes to the ocean, right?
Yep.
But it's like a huge project, no?
It would be. So the thing that I had been exploring, and this comes with my background. So I've been white collar, blue collar, no collar, right? I've renovated several of my family's homes, so I've gotten a little bit of an understanding about piping, and just in like a more residential experience, I know that you can repipe a pipe with like a sheathing that goes inside of the existing pipe, right? And so to me, it seems like that might be feasible to do something like that with existing oil pipelines that we would already have available across this country, to turn that into a water pipeline by using this sheathing type of approach. I don't know if that's feasible, but that just is just one of those natural experiences that I've had in just my own anecdotal experience with piping. But truthfully, yes, there's more abundance of water in the East Coast, and if we can communicate that to the West Coast, that may alleviate some of these challenges that we specifically face here in Nevada, but also across the Southwest as a whole.
Yeah, it is fascinating to me that you want to take this task, because I hardly find any time in my day to do what I have on my to-do list.
Yeah.
Where where does this motivation come from? Like every day getting up and just fighting as hard as you're fighting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that car accident, if you imagine, it changes your whole perspective. Right? You're not promised tomorrow. So I use the analogy. Forgive me if everybody doesn't have a reference point, but with respects to soccer or football, right? The overtime, they call it stoppage time, and the athletes don't know how much time is actually left in the conclusion of the game. And so ever since this car accident, I've been operating on stoppage time, because I could have died in that car accident, right? So I don't know how much time I have left. So I'm going to continue to play until this whistle blows, right? And so for me, at the core of who I am, I like to solve problems, and I'm very good at doing that. And I'm very good at doing large problems, because I don't look at just one vantage. I look at all these different vantages and all these different impacts and how one affects the other, right? Because I take time to explore and try to understand how we got here and what is the right solution, because ultimately, often what happens is there are tweaks that are made, but then there's a failure to account for the ramifications that come along with it, and we see that time and time again. And I'd rather have a more definitive solution, because in my mind, I'd rather be at peace. And being at peace means coming up with definitive solutions rather than half measures. And so for me, truthfully, that's what I want. I would love nothing more than just to live on a farm and just have a family and just relax. But I cannot turn my mind off to all these problems that I think are absolutely solvable. And I think that just with some common sense and somebody who can articulate these messages so that way it resonates with just the average person, that we can get there. But you have to have people that are operating in good faith, that are willing to be patient and explore different arguments so that way it resonates with people. And one of the advantages that I have is having lived in all these places, 11 cities, 2 countries. They all have different perspectives, but we all care about the well-being of our loved ones. Because I have these different perspectives, I've been able to frame different arguments through the lens which people see things through. There's this analogy, and it's often just like a visual reference of, do you see a 6 or a 9, right? And that just depends on what perspective you're seeing it through. Well, I've grown to be able to describe whether it is that you see a 9 or a 6 and frame things through a 6 or a 9. And so my pursuits are not only because I know that I'm capable, but also because I want to fix these things. And I know that we need leadership who are operating with good faith and are willing to be patient and make these arguments so that way everybody can have a common understanding. Because if I'm here to be of service and to help take care of our loved ones and put families and communities first, and you feel that and you see that, then we can solve these problems, because you've afforded me the opportunity, because you've given me your trust, and I've done a good job of earning that trust by articulating what this looks like.
Who was your favorite president? Do you have one?
I do. I actually named one of my dogs after President Lincoln. Yeah. And he's very pertinent at this time, right? Because think about his era, right? He had Civil War happening, and he had to bring back the country together. And often, we don't have that modern day reference to kind of put that, what that would have been like. But I admire people that are able to be diplomatic and make these things happen, to whether it's for the good of the community and be magnanimous. I think that he was able to accomplish that, trying to heal the country. And maybe he didn't have to deploy the proper rhetoric to get the solution that ultimately led to the end of the Civil War, but he certainly accomplished it with his pursuits and the way that he approached things. So I admire him for that.
Yep.
Well, all right, so we had a presidential national debate, okay? And so this took place in New York at Chelsea Studios, which is where Jon Stewart would film his program for Apple TV. At that time, I chastised the Biden administration because I believe that we were committing a genocide, or complicit in helping the genocide. And I made that comment on the debate stage. And what people didn't know at that time is that the woman that I loved, my partner at the time, she was deployed out in Jordan. Okay, so shortly after that, just a few days after that, her base was attacked. 3 soldiers were killed. She was within 200 feet of being killed herself. And these are the experiences that nobody knew, right? Because I couldn't share that and declare that with the public. But it's also comes with the territory of what I've been pursuing, right? Because there are real world ramifications to trying to advocate for change. And along this campaign trail, I've aligned with people who know this intimately, right? We talked about Donald Trump on near assassination the other day. That's the arena that we've entered into. I've been aligned with RFK Jr., and he's lost his father and his uncle, right? So these are things that most people don't have experience around, and it's hard to consider, but this as just being an average human being, an average American, this is the arena I've entered into, and there's been direct impact to my own life around this pursuit. And so part of this story that I wanted to share with people is recently I helped produce, it was a third-party presidential debate, and there was Congressman Thomas Massey out of Kentucky. He came and he was a moderator. Well, he just lost his wife about 2 weeks ago, and he still showed up to be a moderator. And I was in awe of him because my now ex has returned back from deployment. We separated because of what took place on that deployment. I didn't get to internalize what took place, because you can imagine that in this type of pursuit, in this type of role, you have to make sure that you exude confidence and you're the leader, and people need to trust and have faith in you, right? So I didn't get to internalize that when it happened. Since she's returned, of course, I did. And what I experienced was the first time that I started talking with some vets, because I obviously care about the veteran community very much, especially with more recent experience around it, that I started to tear up, and I realized, oh, I can't be a human being. And that was one of those realizations that most people don't have insight into, is we're actually human beings on this side of the camera, right? And so when Thomas Massey showed up to moderate, and he was still jovial and pleasant and polite and engaging with people, I knew what that felt like, to have to be able to be performative, to perform in front of people, even though you may be hurting on the inside. And that was just one of those moments that was very insightful and more of a recent, intimate experience that people don't ever really consider when it comes to this type of life choices that we've made to try to be in service of others.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Your life is under a microscope, and your emotions, I guess, are last.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we are getting to the point. I will please ask you, as a routine of the show, if you could please look directly to.
Yeah, after I've talked about all the problems of America, I gotta put out some hope message here.
Yes,
I gotta give some people some faith that everything's gonna be all right. It is gonna be all right, America. I promise you. I'm here on the job. You've got others that I found along this way that are actually fighting to create a better America for us. But the message, I think you wanted me to include something specific.
Well, no. This is a message, advice.
Okay.
This is a moment for you to talk directly to the audience of this platform and the rest of the world, whoever gets to see this.
Okay. All right. Well, I will share the car accident I've mentioned. Okay. That was a very empowering moment, because what I gleaned from that car accident, that wisdom I walked away with, was that we're not promised tomorrow. And so I lost all the fear of pursuing what it is that I actually want. I started a business. Even though I didn't have a technical background, I started engaging with people that had this knowledge, and I wasn't afraid of trying to discover these answers, even to the point that now I'm running for president of the United States. I mean, I've got on ballots across this country. Even in the primary, I got 81,000 votes. What am I afraid of? I'm not promised tomorrow. You're not promised tomorrow. What is it that you're waiting for to happen for you to go pursue the life that you want? That's all I want for you, is to have you take action and operate without that fear, because life is too short. So go get it while you're here today.
Gabriel Cornejo.
Sí, señor. Gracias por todo.
Or, if I may, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Thank you for your presence. Thank you for honoring me to coming to my show and supporting it. And once again, you have my vote. I
appreciate that. Honestly, it means the world to me. This has been such an awesome experience running, right? And it means the world to me when people are like, I'm willing to commit my vote to you. And then especially for those that have never voted before, it's like, man, there's no greater honor for me. So I appreciate that wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time.
Of course.